shifts, and I have to leave anyways. There is. Are you there, Lingaraju, Prabhu? Sorry, Lakshmikant.
Yes, ma'am. I see only. You may start, Mataji. I think, let others
I think we should start, and because, I have someone waiting for me at the temple with the problems, and I have to leave very quickly. So, should we start?
Yes, Mataji.
Okay. Is this on?
Yeah.
Okay. Narayanam namaskritya naram chaiva narottamam devim saraswatim vyasam tadho jayam udirayet nastya prayeshu bhadreshu nityam bhagavada sevaya bhagavadyuttama shloke bhaktir bhavati naistiki om jnanatimirandhasya nananjana shalakaya चक्षुरुन्मीलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः मुखं करोति वाचालं पङ्गुं लङ्घयते गिरिं यत्कृपात्वमहं वन्दे श्रीगुरुं दीनतारिणम्. So today we are reading Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 6, Verse 7. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Savai Vishwasrijam Garbho Devakarma Atma Shaktiman विभाभाजात्मनात्मानम् एकदा दशदा त्रिधा स वै विश्वसृजं गर्भो देवकर्मात्मशक्तिमान् विभाभाजात्मनात्मानम् एकदा दशधा त्रिधा स वै विश्वसृजं गर्भो देवकर्मात्मशक्तिमान् विभाभाजात्मनात्मानम् एकदा दशदा त्रिधा. Sa, that, why, certainly, Vishwasrijam of the gigantic Virat form, Garbha, total energy, Deva, living energy, Karma, activity of life, Atma, self, Shaktiman, full with potencies, Vibhabhaja, divided, Atmana, by himself, Atmanam, himself, Ekada, in oneness, Dashada, in 10, Trida, and in 3. Translation by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. The total energy of the Mahat Tattva in the form of the gigantic Virat Rupa divided himself by himself into the consciousness of the living entities, the life activity, and self-identification, which are subdivided into 1, 10, and 3 respectively. The total energy of the Mahat Tattva in the form of the gigantic Virat Rupa divided himself by himself into the consciousness of the living entities, the life of activity, and self-identification, which are subdivided into 1, 10, and 3 respectively. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Consciousness is the sign of the living entity or the soul. The existence of the soul is manifest in the form of consciousness called Jnana Shakti. The total consciousness is that of the gigantic Virat Rupa, and the same consciousness is exhibited in individual persons. The activity of consciousness is performed through the air of life, which is of 10 divisions. The airs of life are called prana, apana, udana, vyana, and samana, and are also differently qualified as naga, kurma, krikara, devadatta, and dhananjaya. The consciousness of the soul becomes polluted by the material atmosphere, and thus various activities are exhibited in the false ego of bodily identification. These various activities are described in Bhagavad Gita 2.41 as Bahushaka Hyanantascha Buddhayo Avyavasayinam. The conditioned soul is bewildered into various activities for want of pure consciousness. The conditioned soul is bewildered into various activities for want of pure consciousness. The pure consciousness, in pure consciousness, the activity is one. The consciousness of the individual soul becomes one with the supreme consciousness when there is complete synthesis between the two. The monist believes that there is only one consciousness, whereas the sattvatas or the devotees believe that although there is undoubtedly one consciousness, they are one because there is agreement. The individual consciousness is advised to dovetail with the supreme consciousness, as instructed by the Lord in Bhagavad Gita 18.66. Sarva dharmam parityajya mam ekam sharanam braja. The individual consciousness, Arjuna, is advised to dovetail with the supreme consciousness and thus maintain his conscious purity. It is foolish to try to stop the activities of consciousness, but they can be purified when they are dovetailed with the Supreme. This consciousness is divided into three modes of self-identification according to the proportion of purity. Adhyatmika, or self-identification with the body and mind. Adi Bhaudika, or self-identification with the material products. And Adi Daivika, or self-identification as the servant of the Lord. Of the three, Adi Daivika, self-identification, is the beginning of purity of consciousness in pursuance of the desire of the Lord. Om Ajnanatimidandhasya Snananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. It is a very wonderful purport, like many other purports. I was actually, I have questions on this topic within myself, which I'm still trying to find answers. Unfortunately, today for me, so there is something going on in the temple. I have to leave within a very short time. So I may not take more than 15 or 20 minutes to share with you something from this report from Srila Prabhupada. After that, I will have to leave. Probably, I'm sure you also may have some questions in case, if I have to get up and go. I'm sure, you may be able to get clarification. Maybe we can talk later, or we can, you can discuss among yourself as well. So Srila Prabhupada's purport, this whole purport is about the purity of consciousness of the living entity, and how does the Supreme Lord divide, or the Mahatattva divides itself into three different components, which is the consciousness of the living entity, the life of activity, which is the life airs, and the self-identification. And very clearly, Srila Prabhupada is writing here towards the end, the self-identification is the beginning of purity of consciousness in pursuance of the desire of the Lord, which is like, for those of you who are involved in deity worship, you know that we do this Buddha Shuddhi prayers, and the Buddha Shuddhi prayers are done with the purpose of purifying oneself and reminding oneself that I am not this body, I am a spirit soul, I am part and parcel of the Lord, and functioning with at that platform. That's the purpose of this Buddha Shuddhi prayers. So we can cleanse ourselves externally by taking bath, but consciousness can be purified only by meditation and chanting of the mantras and all these prescribed methods given to us. So this context here is the beginning of the creation, and that these 23 elements which are existing at the beginning in this unmixed, in an unmixed state. And previously, I'm sure other speakers have described about these elements, which includes Mahatattva, Ahankara, Tanmatra, senses, and gross elements, mind. All these components are there. They are all existing in this unmixed state, and the creative activities are in a suspended state, and the controlling deities are at that point offering prayers to the Lord. And these prayers we already discussed in the previous chapter 3.5.39 to 51 verses. So the prayers offered, there are three categories, three subcategories of prayers. One section is dealing with glorifying the Lord's lotus feet. Second section is describing who is qualified and who is unqualified to take shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord. And the third part of the prayers dealing with request, or the prayers are meant for enlightenment and direction, because it is the beginning of creation, and even the presiding deities, they are asking for enlightenment and direction like that. So these prayers were already discussed by other devotees in the previous classes. In this chapter, you will see how the Lord Vishnu is responding to the prayers of these presiding deities. First of all, seeing that creative process is in a suspended state, the Lord is sending his cohesive energy into the elements, and Virat Rupa is manifesting gradually. So this manifestation of the Virat Rupa and the connection between the Karanodaka Sai Vishnu, Garbhodaka Sai Vishnu was something, some questions came to my mind when I was reading this. I don't think I got the answers. So unfortunately, I'm not even able to share even my question. But as we all know, the creative process is very, we may not be able to understand this using our intelligence alone. However, the main message here in this purport is the purity of consciousness. At least that part we can focus on. So when the Lord is responding to the prayers, so by the will of the Lord, these 23 elements, from that the universal form is emerging. And this universal form, as we all know, is the resting place for the planetary systems and all the movable and immovable things within the creation. And that universal form is described as this Hiranmaya, the golden egg. And for me, it is actually, it is something to, when you think about this shining golden egg, which is actually the womb of this the universe, which is looking like a shining golden egg floating in the Karana ocean, and it contains innumerable spirit souls. They are spiritual sparks and emanating so much of energy. It is like it's something you cannot picture within yourself, but it is a throbbing, it is a vibrating material. It is something which is purely spiritual. And the Lord's creation, the Lord's method of introducing the living entities into the womb of material nature. It's something which is, your hair stands on end when you think about that, the process of creation. So this universal, the universe, it is Hiranmaya, and the universal fetus is the word, some description about the universal fetus, which contains all the living entities. And for the 1,000 celestial years, it is residing in that Karana ocean. So there is this sequence in which everything is happening. I'm sure a lot of devotees have spoken about this. And the preliminary part, as we know, the Lord glancing at the material energy. The living entities are, the spirit souls enters into the material nature along with through the Lord's glance, along with the time element. And then Karanadaga Sai Vishnu is receiving prayers and he's responding to the prayers of the demigods. And then he's sending his cohesive energy to create, amalgamate all these elements together. And then the golden egg for 1,000 years in the celestial Arana ocean. And the next stage, Garbhodaga Sai Vishnu is entering and giving life. Actually, all the living entities are in a suspended state, and the demigods and the other living entities, they are all waking up as though from a sleep. So at the end of our life, it is a short duration when the soul accepts another body and the process of reincarnation that goes on. But at the end of the universal creation, all these living entities are going in this dormant state for such a prolonged time, within the body of the Lord, and then again within this Hiranmaya, the golden creation, which is floating within the Karana ocean, and even then in a slumbering state, and those spirit souls are reawakened by the mercy of the Lord. And that is really mind-boggling, that those living entities are kept intact for such a long time from our perspective. But from the perspective of the Lord, that time, the duration of that time is insignificant, nothing. So this next stage, this Virat Purusha, in this particular verse, it is said that is differentiated into the functioning universe consisting of 3 Shaktis, subdivided into 1, 10, and 3. In fact, the expansion of this particular topic comes further. I think it is verse number 10, where details are given with regard to what is this 1, 10, and 3. So the first part of this is the Jiva Shakti, which is the consciousness of the Jivas. And the second is Prana Shakti, which is the life airs, which is moving within our body. You can read the details in the number 10 verse purport. And then the third part is the Atma Shakti, which is the self-identification. So the Lord differentiates into functioning universe consisting of 3 Shaktis. And so, interestingly, this total consciousness and individual consciousness are one. This is the main theme of the purport by Srila Prabhupada. When impersonalists say everything is one and the same, whereas the personalist, the devotee of the Lord, speaks about, yes, they are one and the same. Consciousness, the quality is one and the same, but we are at the same time, we are individual souls, and there is a Supreme Lord who is super conscious of everything. So this is the way Srila Prabhupada beautifully explains this. So Jiva Shakti, the consciousness of the Jivas, is one aspect. Then there is this Prana Shakti, which is the life airs. And then there is the Atma Shakti, which is self-identification. So self-identification is according to the degree of purity of the living entity. So one can identify oneself at Adhyatma or Adi Buddha or Adi Deva stages or aspects. So if one is identifying according to the purity of consciousness, you can say that in Adhyatmika type of self-identification, there we are identifying with the subtle senses. The Bhaudika is with the material products, and Adi Daivika is when we identify ourselves as spirit souls, part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, but we are not this body. We are eternal servants of the Lord, but we are spiritual in nature. We are not material at all. So Prabhupada writes the last one is the beginning of the purity of consciousness in pursuance of the desire of the Lord. That's what Srila Prabhupada is writing in the purport. 1 second. He says that identification in the beginning, identification, the Adidaiviga self-identification is the beginning of purity of consciousness in pursuance of the desire of the Lord. So when we come to that way of understanding our position as pure spirit souls, as living entities who are part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, when we identify that way, and then we recognize that we are here in pursuance of the desire of the Lord, then there is that is the beginning of the purity. Until that stage, any other type of identification is all, contaminated consciousness. So that is a short way of presenting this particular verse. And I'm sure that many of you must have read much more details or heard much more details on this topic. Unfortunately for me, I have someone waiting at the temple, some problems I have to go. And because of that, I will have to take leave from you very quickly. But if anyone has anything to contribute to this discussion, please feel free to do so. Hare Krishna. Okay. So, Lingaraji Prabhu.
No, thank you so much, Mataji. A nice class. I mean, this is very, very technical. It was like, I mean, from the verse perspective, I mean, I think the purport is little detailed when you are reading and explaining. It's. I mean, I was thinking, what is the gist of the verse, right, and the purport. And then here, Prabhupada is saying one sentence in the first paragraph. The conditioned soul is bewildered into various activities for want of pure consciousness. So for want of pure consciousness, maybe if you can just elaborate, Mataji, I mean, what?
Yeah, so the want of pure consciousness meaning, because we are identifying at Adi Bhautiga and Adhyatmika and Adi Bhautiga type of identification. So want of pure consciousness is identifying that who am I, not at all identifying at the bodily platform, but identifying that I'm part of that universal consciousness, which is actually, that's even more interesting, that total consciousness and individual consciousness. In fact, we have the same quality of that total consciousness of the Supreme Being. And we are not thinking about that at all. So we are thinking that, okay, even if I identify myself as a spirit soul, I'm not consciously reminding myself that I am part and parcel of that Supreme Being who is total consciousness. And therefore, there is a level of purity that we are unaware of, that is existing within us. And therefore, most of the time, 99.9% of the time, we are identifying ourselves with all the other things which we are not. There are so many other things which we are not, we are identifying with. Whereas in this case, the real identification has to be that I am by nature, I am this pure consciousness, I'm part of this universal consciousness, that is that of the Supreme Lord, total consciousness. So as long as when that is lacking, purity is, the degree of purity will be, can you please close the door? I'm in the class. Thank you. Yes. So the degree of purity will be much less. I mean, degree of purity is hardly, and we cannot even call ourselves pure when we are identifying with everything else that we have created for ourselves in this material world. Everything else, that's our identification all the time. Everything else that we have created for ourselves. Everything, every problem that we have is more real to us than ever paying any attention to the fact that I am part of that total consciousness. It's very hard for us because we do have this material body. This covering is there. As a result, we identify with that covering and everything else associated with that covering, which is so real for us. That's my understanding.
Mathaji, normally we hear of Adi Atmika, Adi Devika, Adi Bhautika as the miseries that affect us. And I just found it so interesting.
Yeah. That usually we hear about those three miseries, and in this context, it is not about miseries. It is about the self-identification. In three levels of self-identification is what is mentioned in this purport. I had many other questions also which came up when I was reading this yesterday, and I still don't have answers. I'm sure you all have questions too. Yeah, you are asking why is it different? The same terminology.
I'm just hearing it for the first time in this way. You know, I've always heard of it as misery, so I'm really confused actually.
No, I think that same terminology is used, and the misery in the context of miseries, the classification of miseries, that which is coming from within ourselves and outside living entities, and that's the way that is explained. But in this case, they are using the same terminology, but the word is it is to explain self-identification. That's interesting. Just to explain self-identification, that same terminology is used. So maybe these terminologies are can be used in different contexts.
Yeah.
So only people who know Sanskrit more detail, or is it something like you use common in different contexts? It looks like that to me, but I don't know.
Thank you, Mathaji.
Thank you. And actually, the more details are coming up in verse number 10, detailed explanation of Prana Shakti and Atma Shakti and all that. Yeah.
Hare Krishna, Mataji.
Yeah.
Please accept my humble obeisances.
Mine too.
Mataji, just to the same question that Mataji was asking earlier, it's similar to how we use primary, tertiary, secondary, these words in multiple contexts. These terms are also similar. They can be used in multiple contexts. They're just a way of enumerating it. That's all. Thank you, Mataji.
Thank you. Okay, so I have to go. I have to fall into the temple. There's some things going on there. Thank you all for your patience. Please accept my humble obeisance. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.